Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Keto Answers podcast. I am Dr. Anthony Gustin, and it is my job to get to the bottom of a ketogenic diet and get you the answers you need to make keto work for you. Joining me this week is Ryan Munsey. Ryan is one of the most curious minds in self-optimization. Him and I get along really well just because we both question everything we do on a continuous basis and try to get our own individual health as high as it possibly can be. He learned all this great stuff from experts in the health field, from being the host of the Optimal Performance podcast for a long time. He now hosts his own podcast called The Better Human Project. You can find out a lot of his work at ryanmunsey.com. Ryan and I hit on tons of really interesting topics in this episode, including his experiment with a carnivore diet, which is a meat-only diet, his thoughts on a ketogenic diet approach, breaking common myths about nutrition, and why he thinks building strength is the most important thing one can do for your body. Ryan is an amazing wealth of knowledge about anything self-optimization, and I'm sure this episode will leave you with more questions than answers, but I'm sure you're going to love it. So tune in. Before we get to the episode, I wanted to chat about our sponsor, Perfect Keto. Perfect Keto is all about making a ketogenic diet healthy and accessible. Whether you're reading all of our online guides or articles or enjoying Perfect Keto's exogenous ketones or any other keto-friendly products, everything you need to make keto work for you is at perfectketo.com. I know what you're thinking. Hey, aren't you the founder of Perfect Keto? Yep, that's right. And all of my insanely high standards have been put into making each and every product. My background as a functional medicine clinician helps me craft the cleanest and healthiest possible products and the best information about the ketogenic diet. Head on over to perfectketo.com to learn anything you need to know about the ketogenic diet. And if you've never tried any of our products before, feel free to use the code KETOPODCAST for 20% off your first order. With that being said, let's get into the show. All right, Mr. Munsey, how are you today?
I'm doing well.
Thanks for being on the show, man. Yeah, I appreciate it.
I'm pumped to be here and excited to chat with you, man.
Yeah, so you and I have had kind of this always test mentality, and that has led to you very recently, why I wanted you on the show in the first place, kind of challenge a paradigm that had many people thinking that was impossible, which led to a carnivore experiment. So let's just jump right in and kind of explain to me what happened there and kind of your background in nutrition too.
Yeah, so I guess let's start with a couple of things. It went the entire month of November with 1 or 2 days on either side. It was I actually started the Monday before Halloween. We were on a road trip. There happened to be an elevation burger right next to our hotel where I knew I could get grass-fed, high-quality burgers and beef. So I was like, well, I want to go eat those. So let's start this thing today. But I have a degree in food science and human nutrition. So, I do have some background knowledge in this. We can get into, some of that stuff in later parts of the conversation, because I think that is relevant. It's not like I just said, oh, that looks fun, let me try it. As a matter of fact, when I first heard of it, I thought it was crazy. I think I had the exact same reaction that most people have had and will have, that like you said, it's impossible, that can't be healthy, that's crazy.
And so can you just back up for a second and say what it is that people think is crazy or that you thought was crazy?
Yeah, so I mean, the more I thought about it, so I was very dismissive. I didn't even really look into it initially. And then, as the week went by, I just kept thinking back to this guy that I saw and doing it. And it turns out it was Sean Baker, and it's the guy who's recently been on Joe Rogan. And, I've interviewed him for the podcast, and not sure when this or that will come out, but that's definitely on my podcast, The Better Human Project. So if you guys haven't listened to that one, definitely check that out. But as the week went on and in the subsequent week, I started having these thoughts of, well, okay, if you're eating nothing but meat, what about micronutrients? And what about the gut biome? I mean, there is zero plant matter. There's zero fiber in this diet. What about all of the things that we think we know, all of the things that we think we're supposed to do to be healthy and to eat a balanced diet and a healthy diet? And the more I thought about those things, the more I wanted to see what these people were saying about that. And I started following them all on Twitter, and there's this whole carnivore world, and some of them are specifically keto carnivore, others are just carnivore. There are people who've been doing this diet for 20 years and feel amazing. They're, subjectively healthy, and some people have a little bit of data, but any of those people who have data, it was N equals 1. The thing that I really liked about this Sean Baker guy was, at the time that I discovered it, they were just getting into the beginning of a 90-day experiment. He had set up a website called N equals mini, and I think they had something like 400 people volunteer to do this diet for 90 days and then submit all of their data so that they could, the idea is if it's N equals 1, it's anecdotal, but as that N equals number becomes larger and larger, you get a much bigger sample size. And then at some point, it just becomes data. We don't have all of that data yet. And, it's going to take years to understand all of the implications and what is all there. But, for me, I did it for 35 days and I'm still using it sort of as a default. Like I didn't just say, okay, project's done, I'm going to eat a big ass salad the next day. I didn't want to destroy my body by, giving it a ton of vegetables that it wasn't used to. But, I didn't develop scurvy. I don't have jaundice. Nothing bad has happened.
Right. So I think that's yeah. So just to be clear, this is just a diet composing of 100% animal products, no plant matter.
Correct. Right. Correct. No plant matter, 100% animal products. There were, we can talk about exactly what I did. But, I wanted basically to find out what would happen. What is it like? Because, he is a world record holding masters athlete following this diet. So his athletic performance went up. Everybody who's doing this diet says they feel better, that joint pain went away, that, their gut health actually improved and that they became more regular with bowel movements, which, that shocked me. And not to get too far into something that maybe people don't want to hear about, but that's, again, you're not eating any plants. That's definitely a concern that people are going to have if you make that dietary change. So it was really fascinating to me, and I wanted to see if I could poke holes in it. And because the data did not exist, I wanted to do it in a way where, I did test my lab data for my blood, and I have done a stool test, and I should be getting those results back later this week. So if I get those, I will send them to you, and you can post them on the show notes for this so people can see, how my microbiome changed following this diet.
Yeah, it'd be great to get that data. Curious though, also, like, how did you feel when you went through this? What was the progression like? I know that you were posting on social media a little bit, and you had some strength losses in the beginning, but then you kind of ramped up and then felt pretty good. Can you just explain what this objective experience was like, kind of going through this 35 days?
Yeah, definitely. So I would say, and they warned about this, that there is an adaptation period. Anybody who's tried keto is familiar with the keto flu. There's definitely a carnivore flu. It takes about sometimes 7, 10, 14 days. I would say the first 3 days, I felt great. It just instantly felt better. I felt like I had a bounce in my step. I felt more powerful. But then sort of days 4 through 10, I was struggling. And, had I not committed in the very beginning to doing this for a full month, had I not put it out there on social media that I was doing this, I may have said, I'm throwing in the towel. This is, not how I want to feel. Right. So if anybody is thinking about trying it, I would encourage them to say, no matter how I feel in the first phase, I'm going to do it for 30 days or 60 days or 90 days, whatever that period is. You will feel better once you get through that adaptation period. And in that period, my strength went down a little bit. I just felt like crap. I would go into the gym and I don't feel like lifting, but I go because, I go. I'm not going to not go. That's part of, who I am. It's, you show up, you do what you're supposed to do when you're supposed to do it. And, it sucked because I didn't have the energy and couldn't perform the way I wanted to. But I don't remember exactly what day it was, but, around 9, 10, 11, I started feeling great. And I did change the way I was training to match the diet. I knew that I couldn't do a lot of, what I would call CrossFit style, high intensity in that mid range, with reps somewhere between 5 and 20 and going hard. I changed to a pure strength-based program. The highest rep scheme that I was doing was 5, but I was lifting with a high frequency. I was lifting 5 days a week. And, on this program, after 2 weeks, I retested my maxes and, it's not a true max out day, but my strength on these, what were supposed to be fairly easy singles were, every single lift, deadlift, squat, bench, weighted pull-ups are all starting to approach, maxes from before. And 2 weeks later, they're all 20 pounds higher. And then
wow.
a week later, I'm hitting doubles with, the weight that was what I was hitting for a single before. So, the strength is there. And because I'm actually feeling a lot better, towards the end of the experiment, and my strength is up, and basically every subjective measure is up throughout my life. I don't feel compelled to completely abandon the carnivore diet just because the 30 days are over.
Right.
I do miss certain plant foods, and I will eat them because I want to, but I don't feel like I have to for optimal health, which is really weird.
So you mentioned a few different things here, which I think are interesting to know. One would be the adaptation period. And so I think this is important for everybody to realize when they're switching drastically from one type of eating to another, which I think actually gets easier as time goes on. So for instance, if you fast for the first time for a couple of days, or if you switch to a ketogenic diet, like you said, the keto flu, and it looks like the carnivore diet has something similar here, where there's always going to be a phase where you might feel good for a day or two and then like crap and then kind of rebound. Or a lot of times, like you said, if you didn't have the social accountability, you probably would have dropped off. And a lot of people do that, I think, in a ketogenic diet especially. And same thing with fasting. Like when I'm days 2 through 4 of fasting, I feel like trash. I feel garbage. But then days like 4, 5, 6, I feel incredible. Like my energy and focus is just unparalleled. And so one of those things too is realize that sometimes you just have to push through it. Obviously, don't be stupid and push through where you actually like are sick or need to eat food or need to change stuff up. But that adaptation period and pushing past that a lot of times can teach you, as your body adapts to something, what it actually does feel like to be adapted to that style of eating or way of life.
Yeah, that's really good advice.
Also, you said that you decrease the amount of training, I guess, intensity maybe from kind of a cross style to more of a strength version. Is that just because of the decreased carbohydrate, or what was your hypothesis around that?
Well, I think I've just always enjoyed strength training. I've always gravitated more towards the strength-based, more of a powerlifting type setup, as opposed to higher volume and maybe a bodybuilding style approach. Right. So, I'd much rather go in and do squats, deadlifts, presses, pull-ups, as opposed to, 10 different exercises for chest, or, a bunch of different exercises for arms or back or whatever. So, the approach that I took is a program written by Dan John and Pavel, who are legends in the strength world, and it's called Even Easier Strength. And you literally go in and you do the same movements every day, and it's designed to be sort of sub-maximal work, and it's the results come from frequency. If you look at mechanics, they usually have pretty jacked forearms, and it's because they're using their hands and their forearms all the time. You look at a soccer player, and they usually have pretty big calves. Why? Well, high frequency of stimulation. Right. So, there's a lot to be said for high frequency training. Gymnasts train almost daily. Olympic weightlifters train almost daily. So it's following some of that approach. And, I knew that I could go in and do 40 minutes of sub-maximal work every single day, no matter how I felt. That's why I chose to do that approach.
Sounds great. So, why in the first place, like, how have you gotten to the point where you want to test stuff like this? Is you and I have kind of a similar mindset, and I think this is why we connect pretty deeply, is that we always question a lot of things, and then we're the ones on the brunt of the testing. What kind of got you there, and what's your experience been like kind of growing up with nutrition and how you approach just diet, exercise, and life in general?
Yeah, I think nutrition's always been an interesting thing for me. I mean, that's what my degree is. I have a food science and human nutrition degree. And in college, I started to realize that, everything we were taught was essentially wrong. And, I'm 33, and throughout my lifetime, every single thing that they, in quotations, everything that they have said we should do from a nutrition standpoint is basically wrong. You could probably say that for even my parents' generation, where it was the, red meat's bad for you, and so is butter, so are eggs, and eat a high carbohydrate diet. I mean, when I was a kid growing up, it was 6 to 11 servings a day on the bottom square of that pyramid for whole grains and bread and cereal. And then I find out that things like cornflakes are invented, in 1894 by a dude at the Kellogg's Sanitarium to lower testosterone so that it would, in hopes, prevent masturbation. And an interesting note on the cereal industry is that the guy named Post, who founded a competing cereal company, was actually one of his patients at that sanitarium. So that's something that a lot of people don't know about breakfast cereals, that it was actually originally designed to lower testosterone. So it's, if everything that we've been told is always wrong, how can you not have this mindset of questioning what we're told? And, like I said, then I get to college and I saw it from a different level where, in the classroom, I've got this teacher who, is not healthy, is overweight and doesn't move well. And she's up there telling me that all foods fit. And you don't have to have a nutrition degree to understand that not all foods are equal.
Right.
And it just, when I started hearing things like that, and I really just, the other side of this too was, in college, I had to take all of these science courses. And then I had to take all of the, within your major kind of nutrition stuff. And in the science courses, I'm learning biochemistry and metabolism and anatomy and physiology and everything I learn in there. And then I go into a nutrition class and they're like, well, you need to do this. And I'm like, that doesn't match up with what I'm taught in the science class. So why are you telling me this? And that's when I realized that, it's all funded by big agriculture and the sugar industry and, all that stuff. So I really just, I've been trained as a scientist all my life. I excelled in math and science growing up and all through high school, and went to special high school for that. And so I just think like a scientist, and that's the scientific method. That's question everything, and it's start with a hypothesis and then test it. And I don't know. I'm also kind of that dude that if you tell me the water's cold, I'm gonna go see how cold is it.
Right. Yeah, that's kind of funny that you said that you learned the biochemistry and all this different stuff, and then it just didn't match up with nutrition courses. I actually had that same problem both in undergrad and grad school. Mm-hmm. Same exact thing.
Yeah, and it's so frustrating too, because part of the reason that you want to get into this program is that you want to get out and you want to educate people, and It's like, oh, well, this isn't. It's like I have to do this to get the credentialing to do what I want to do, right. But I'm not going to use any of the stuff that you're preparing me with.
Oh, it's painful, man. I remember I would always be the guy challenging the professor in class about actual biochemistry, and like, well, if you ate this, like, wouldn't it have effect on this pathway, and then like, modify this? And then everyone just stared at me like, oh, God, come on. Like, I just want to leave.
I got too. I sat in the back of class and, I've got my can of tuna and avocado and, they're sitting there and they're like, well, if somebody is diabetic, we're going to lower their calories from 60% carbohydrate to 50% carbohydrate. I'm like raising my hand. I'm like, why? Why carbohydrates do? And why are we giving these people who don't handle carbohydrates well 50% of their intake from the thing that they don't handle? Like that 10% reduction is really going to help them. Yeah. No.
So how did life look after you graduated with the food science degree?
Well, if I was going to pursue that, it looked pretty bleak, which is why I took my other option. In college, I actually, I grew up playing sports. I wasn't good enough to play at Clemson. That's where I went to school. So I got into lifting weights, and that turned into sort of a fascination with bodybuilding, which led me to modeling. And somehow I got a modeling contract and was able to go straight from college to New York City to be a fitness model.
Well, you need to have good nutrition to be a model, right?
Right. And like I said, I was in the back of class eating tuna and avocado and being the dude that disagreed with all the stuff the teachers were saying. So, yeah, I had a really good understanding even then about how to, get my body to look the way I wanted it to. I really became obsessed with figuring out how we could manipulate certain inputs, whether it be training or diet, and get the output in performance and aesthetics that we wanted.
So what were the things that you learned kind of tactically at that point, as far as things affecting your outward appearance?
Yeah, I think for sure it was managing carbohydrate intake, in terms of getting lean and really, obviously to be on a bodybuilding stage or as a fitness model, you're talking about a level of leanness than what we would talk about now for somebody looking to just be healthy and feel good. So if you take basically the same approach, but maybe you're not as intense with it, or you're not trying to take it quite as far. But that's when I really learned about food prep and sort of doing all the little things that most people overlook or don't think about to make sure that they can stay on track and have success, whether it be, packing your meals and taking them with you, or, stashing your emergency meals like in a locker or at your desk or in your car or wherever you're going to be, sort of learning how to plan ahead when you take trips, whether it be, looking online and finding, agreeable places to eat. You can browse menus online all the time now. Little things like that even now I don't even think of as like a big deal. But then when I start coaching people and talking to people, those are the things that come up that, a lot of people don't think to do.
Yeah, it's kind of a lifestyle shift at some point. You mentioned carbohydrates being something that you would watch. Were you doing something that looks like a ketogenic diet back then, or was it more so just low carb? Like, how were you approaching nutrition to get
Yeah.
there?
So one of the impetuses for me to get into nutrition at that point in my life was I'm the only male in my family who is not diabetic. And at some point in college, my dad found out he was type 2 diabetic. His older brother also had been diagnosed that way. Their younger brother was type 1. So this idea of, hey, every dude and every guy in my family has this thing. So, that was sort of why I really started paying attention to this. But it was also happening at the same time that I was getting into performance training and bodybuilding and modeling. And I really started to see these overlaps. And, I just kept going down that rabbit hole. And, everything that I saw in biochemistry and in physiology class, and then everything that I read on my own, I think most of my knowledge that I use now is stuff that I either learned in the actual science class or in my own educational pursuits, not, in the nutrition classes.
Yeah, right.
And yeah, unfortunately. And, I just started to realize that, like, hey, if I can control blood sugar and insulin, then I can, be in a fat burning state that I want to be in. And, it can also level out energy and mood swings, and, I don't have cravings. So I started feeling better. I started getting better results. So it just made sense to continue to do that. And, then, like I said, you keep going to these classes and you're learning about anatomy and physiology and biochemistry. And you're like, well, okay, so this is why it makes sense. And, it was funny. I was talking to somebody recently that when I was in college, I remember doing the early versions of what was called the anabolic diet, or the TNT diet, that was written by Jeff Volek, who is like one of the big time ketogenic and low carb proponents. But back then it was like 5 days, Monday through Friday, of basically just protein and fat, and then 24 to 48 hours of a refeed or a carb up. So it was basically a cyclic ketogenic diet back then. And, then it evolved. I've tried every different version of fasting and paleo, and, no matter how I eat, I've always had a focus on food quality. From the very moment that I started paying attention in college, I was trying to find organic, grass-fed. So I think that's a bigger issue than, whether it's paleo or keto or whatever label you put on the way you eat. I think food quality is probably the most important thing.
Yeah, I mean, that's the biggest thing that I like to harp on to, is that it doesn't matter how you eat, keto or not, if it's your macros. Like, if you're not hitting on food quality first, there's no point. No.
Right.
So had you tracked your ketone levels? Obviously not back then. I mean, I remember in undergrad, I did the same thing where for the same reason I wanted to get jacked in the summertime and look real good. So me and some of my friends would do basically a very high, like moderate protein, high fat, fasting, a lot of fasting. And so we were obviously getting into a state of ketosis, but just not labeling that as such back then. Do you remember when the tides kind of shifted and keto became popular? And at that point, did you start testing and kind of tweaking around?
Being in and around bodybuilding circles, I'd heard of it, but I'd never even thought to really experiment with it or try it until it was PaleoFX when you and I actually first bumped into each other. I guess that would have been the 2016 conference. And, that's where, I first started seeing a lot of the companies that had exogenous ketones. And, that's where, it was clear that it was becoming a big sensation. And, I tried some of the products and said, all right, well, I can see how this would fit into everything. And so after that it would have been like summer of 2016 was when I said, all right, I'm going to go keto for the rest of the year and see what happens. And I did that until the beginning of 2017. And then I went back to, I guess you could call it a cyclic ketogenic diet. I like, no matter whether you're keto or not keto, I really think that we need to limit the amount of sugar that we consume, the amount of sugar we burn over our lifetime. If you can keep that number as low as possible, right, I think you'll have ideal health or as close to ideal health as possible. And then match that with, impeccable food quality.
So what did you learn at first when you switched to a ketogenic diet and started tracking that in the summer of 2016? What were the big takeaways, either positive or negative?
Yeah, so the big takeaways, I felt brain function definitely went up. I could do more work and longer. I don't think it necessarily made me better, but it enabled me to work longer. And instead of being done at at an 8 or a 10 hour mark, I could work 12, 14 hours a day and not be fatigued mentally. And then I felt great. At some point though, my strength did start to go down. It was probably around the 1 month mark. Okay. And by the end of 2016, all of my 1 rep maxes were down about 25% from where they had been a month prior to, starting the keto diet. And for me, with the physical side of things, strength is the adaptation that leads to all other adaptations. That's a quote that it stood out to me as I was, becoming a strength coach. And, when I used to own my own gym, and, the gym was called House of Strength because it made that much of an impact, for me and for anything else that we want to do. So
can you just explain that kind of ethos a little bit more?
Yeah. So, all right, think about it. Like if you're a CrossFit athlete, right, and you want to have a better Fran time, I forget the exact movements that are in Fran, but like thrusters are in
pull-ups.
Yeah, right. So if a thruster is in Fran and your 1 rep max for a thruster is 135, you're going to get destroyed when you have to do 21, 15, 9 reps with 95 pounds. I don't have a calculator in front of me, but that's essentially, let's call it 100 over 150. That's 2/3, right? So it's like 66% of your 1 rep max. Now, if we take your 1 rep max in the thruster from 135 to 185, you're now doing Fran with about 50% of your 1 rep max. So to be able to elevate your ceiling, you elevate your maximum capacity, then your operational capacity is greater. So, you gotta, if the way this was actually taught to me was, I grew up in the country and, best friends lived on a dairy farm. And, if you can only lift 1 square bale 1 time, you're going to have a hard day when you got to go out in the field and lift square bales all day long. Right. So, I think that's the best way to say it is raising your maximum capacity so that your operational capacity is now even higher. Right. So 70%, if my 1 rep max on a deadlift is 100 pounds, 70% of that is 70 pounds. If I raise my deadlift max to 200 pounds, 70%, the same output level, that same perceived exertion is now 140 pounds.
Right. So do you think there are any big things that people are ignoring with strength, maybe in different forms? Like obviously CrossFit and stuff like this are big on like pulling movements, but like where do you think the biggest deficiencies are?
Yeah. Well, if you take that lesson and you apply it to anything else that you want to do, right? So remember the original ethos was that's the adaptation that leads to all other adaptations, right? So let's say you want to get bigger. If you want to put on more muscle mass, so if you're 70% goes from 70 pounds to 140 pounds, you can now do that rep range at 70% is, 10, 12, 15 reps. If you're doing 10, 12, 15 reps with 140 pounds instead of 70 pounds, that is a significant increase in mechanical tension and stimulus for your muscles. Now, you're not going to go from 70 to 140 in a day, but over that year, you're going to start to do higher reps with a significantly higher load, which helps you with hypertrophy. If your goal is fat loss and you're doing a barbell complex for fat loss, or if you're looking for performance and you're that CrossFit athlete doing Fran, your Fran time is going to go down if you're using 66%, if you go from using 66% down to 50%, or your fat loss is going to be significantly greater if you can do a barbell complex at 95 pounds instead of needing to use 65 pounds.
Right. Makes total sense, obviously. Yep. So let's just jump in quick. I want to get kind of your overview on how you operate your life. So before you were doing, actually, let's pause for a second. You said that you added in a little bit of carbohydrates and did a cyclical ketogenic diet kind of at the beginning of this year. Did you hold on to that until the carnivore diet? And how did you feel adding in carbs? Was it strength improved and everything else got better? Or like what were the things that you noticed made a difference adding in carbs every once a week or so? Yeah,
strength came back. It took me a few months to get all the way back, but it definitely did come back. And I just felt better. I didn't realize that my sleep quality had suffered, but having carbs, I was doing carbs 2 days a week. So when I say I added them back in, I kept the basic template of the keto setup. And then 2 days a week, I would choose my two most strenuous or heaviest days in the gym. And I would do, so this is the other thing is I typically follow an intermittent fasting setup. So I would have a small snack around maybe 11 or 12, and then I'd go lift, and then I would have the rest of my food, 3 or 4, something like that. And
so what did that snack look like?
The snack was usually I would keep that one low carb, and it would just be. It used to be 6 whole eggs until I found out I had an egg intolerance, and then I removed all my eggs from my diet. But it would be about that macro breakdown, so somewhere around 40 to 50 grams of protein and 30 to 40 grams of fat, something like that. And either sauerkraut or, the fat would either come from 100% chocolate or avocado. And then after lifting, I would basically on those carb days, I would flip-flop my macros. So if I would normally have 50 grams of carbs and 200 grams of fat on a keto setup day, I would just flip-flop that, and it would be 200 grams of carbs and 50 grams of fat. And that's counting the fat that I had prior to lifting. Okay. So the other thing that this did was it was not only was it carb and fat cycling, but it was calorie cycling, right? So, I mean, if you're looking at that switch, 200 grams of carbs is 800 grams of fat, or I'm sorry, 800 calories, right? So 200 times 4 is 800 calories. And on the fat days, 200 grams of fat times 9 calories per gram is 1,800. Mm-hmm. So you're looking at a difference of 1,000 calories. So it was a way to sort of stay lean and sort of control body fat levels as well.
What were your protein levels at that point as far as macronutrient composition?
Yeah, somewhere around 150, because I was trying to stay in ketosis on those, what I would call like a default day. And I think that's been the biggest sort of epiphany or paradigm shift since moving to the carnivore setup, is that I realized that was just way too little protein. And I think that's one of the reasons that I felt so bad following a keto approach in terms of strength. And what's been interesting on the keto, on the carnivore experiment, I tested my ketones a few times, and they were around 0.7 or 0.9 every time I tested them, which, when you're eating nothing but meat and it's like 2 or 3 pounds of meat a day, you really don't think you're going to be in ketosis. But when you do the math on what I was doing, it was still 60 to 65% fat. And I'm intermittent fasting on a daily basis. So I'm borderline ketosis.
Right. Interesting. One of the things that I noticed when I went strict keto and like really measured everything on a day-to-day basis is that I couldn't go over like 80 to 90 grams of protein per day, or else I'd be under 0.5. And this is a thing too that I always like to point out is people are so radically different. Obviously, you're way more jacked than I am, so that has something to do with it. Like, you can handle a bit more protein, but yeah, it's one of these things where people are so different. There's some people at the office, some of my employees as well, that they can go 150 grams protein, no problem in a day. Where if it seems to be for me, like over 70, 80 grams is when I get kicked out, even with fatty cuts and kind of chopping it up a little bit. So yeah.
That's crazy. Yeah. And that's, one of the other things about this carnivore experiment, I had Amy Berger on our podcast back in the fall, and she wrote a book on Alzheimer's, and she's a big nutrition researcher and speaker. And she made a really interesting point that most of the foods that we tend to overeat are plant-based foods. Mm-hmm. If you think about, anything that you would binge on or anything that you would overeat or stuff yourself, it is a plant-based food. And I thought that was a really, really interesting insight. And as I went through my month of carnivore, this is something that a lot of carnivores have said, and something that I experienced was that it really does regulate your appetite. If all you eat is meat, you're not going to eat unless you're really hungry. You learn the difference between physiological and psychological hunger. You learn the difference between cravings and eating out of boredom, or, eating because you want to. Trust me, if you're hungry enough to cook a steak or open a can of tuna and eat it, like, you're hungry. You don't have to be that hungry to eat, chocolate or nuts or, almond butter. And that's not to say that those aren't good foods and that we shouldn't eat them, but it's a very interesting exercise in maybe changing your relationship with food or the way we think about food.
Right. And I think I mentioned to you earlier that I just moved in the last day or two. Not being at my office or at my previous place where I have stuff like that around, I just noticed in the last 2 days, like, I haven't eaten, I went to, it's 1 o'clock right now, I still haven't eaten today. Yeah. Whereas I would have pounded a bunch of nuts or whatever, like handfuls of this type of thing. But yeah, so I haven't been hungry, but I just eat these things kind of either out of habit or, because they taste good, or I know I should be eating something. Like you said, separating the actual physiological versus psychological hunger, I think is a big thing that happens with a couple of different things. Food quality, it helps, obviously. Eating like real foods and like foods in their whole form helps. And a ketogenic diet, I think, is a really good job at that. It just kind of regulates all this stuff. So that's kind of an interesting point you made about that. So your meal is kind of that snack. I'm assuming all this stuff is kind of whole food based, just proteins, fats from real sources. And then what are you getting for your carbohydrates? Is it more like starchy vegetables, or how are you doing that?
It was sweet potatoes and blueberries, Brussels sprouts, squash, beets, things like that, like typical paleo style, produce, things that come from the earth. I've always been a big fan of, if man made it, don't eat it. So I have an intolerance to oats as well. So I don't eat oats. You could do rice. Some people tolerate that well. Some people don't. I don't. Yeah. For some reason, it just doesn't agree with me.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things about rice that I've always thought is that you mentioned all these other foods, sweet potatoes, blueberries, Brussels sprouts, beets. Look, if you put all those things together and look at the color of those versus the color of boiled rice, yes, you get a caloric load and some energy from it, but you're missing out on so much potential micronutrient load that I think that it's not, like you said, it's not a negative food, but if you're eating that, you're not eating something else. And I think you have an opportunity cost in your food at that point.
Exactly. Yeah, it's that is something that I've always kind of considered is, what am I getting with this, right? Like, what are those, beneficial compounds that are in this, for the equivalent number of calories or grams of carbs or grams of fat, whatever.
Yeah, biggest bang for the buck foods is always something that I try to think of as well. Yeah. So is that something you're going to kind of revert to now that you're peeling back from a carnivore diet, or you keep the protein up and kind of settle back into this carb cycling? How are you going to approach it?
When I switched to carnivore, I started eating 2 meals a day instead of like a small snack and then a bigger feast. So essentially, the average day I would eat somewhere between 1 to 2 pounds of meat between 10 and 11 in the morning. And then I would have another 1.5 to 2.5 pounds of meat around, I don't know, sometime between 3 and 5 in the afternoon. And then what I'm doing now as I transition out of it is I'm keeping that same setup. And I really like the way that those macros worked for me. I don't know exactly what they were, so I probably shouldn't phrase it that way. But
so you didn't track the macros day to day?
I didn't. So when I set up the carnivore diet, I looked to see what most people were doing, and sort of their go-to cut of meat was a ribeye. So I looked at what's in a ribeye, and it's about a 1.4 to 1 ratio of protein to fat. So I said, okay, I'm not going to eat ribeye all the time, but whatever I eat, I'm going to try, to the best of my ability without going insane. I'm not going to get out a food scale or a calculator, but I'm going to try to hit that 1.4 ratio. So in other words, if I'm eating venison or turkey, it's a leaner cut, I'm going to add some sort of fat to it so that I can get about where I would be if this was a ribeye. If I'm eating ground beef or ground lamb, it's already 85-15 or 80-20, and those are about in the right ratio. I think 85-15 was almost dead on that ratio. And what I'm going to do now, what I've been doing this week as I transition out of it, is eating the same amount of meat and then sometimes choosing leaner cuts so that I can get fat from plant sources like an avocado or 100% chocolate. And then if I want, I've always been a huge fan of fermented foods. So I actually missed being able to eat sauerkraut. Those were the 3 things I missed on the carnivore diet: avocado, chocolate, and sauerkraut. So I said, you know what? Those are the things I missed. That's what I'm going to add back in. So I'm eating, meat and leaner cuts so I can add the plant fats and then sauerkraut. So I'm keeping the meal times and the amount of protein. I really like the way I feel with the higher amounts of protein. So
interesting. Yeah. So I mentioned Inspired by You, we had a conversation about this, and I posted to people on Instagram that I was thinking about doing this challenge as well. I've been moving around a lot lately and traveling a lot. So I think that whenever I get settled, probably about when this airs, wherever I can chunk out 6 weeks of time where I'm not going to be traveling. I just assume that getting high quality of food while traveling with this, because preparing protein is actually not very convenient. You have to have basically a kitchen to do it. And so unless you want to get cans of tuna or something like that, and that's all you eat when you travel. But so when I can get 6 weeks uninterrupted time, which would be like mid-January or so, I'm going to execute on this as well. And I think there's some things that we talked about as well. Like, did you incorporate organ meat much, if at all, and how often?
I did. So even before the carnivore diet, I had a goal of eating. My favorite way to get organ meats is liverwurst from U.S. Wellness Meats. Mm-hmm. And I would eat one of those a week because that equates to like 4 ounces of liver and whatever the recommendations were for. It's because it's got liver, heart, and kidneys in it. Mm-hmm. So I stocked up on that when I started the keto or the carnivore diet. And originally I was going to just kind of portion it out and eat, a little bit of it here, a little bit of it there. But as I got into the diet, I stopped measuring. I stopped caring. I was just like, you know what? I'm just going to hack off a chunk of it. I'm going to eat it. If I'm hungry, I'm going to eat more. And I tried to be intentional with not measuring or, really trying to just eat based on how I felt, to really sort of be instinctive and intuitive with the way I was eating. And that was really liberating. It was really freeing. And I think that was one of the things I enjoyed about the carnivore diet. If I'm still hungry and there's bacon, I'm going to cook some bacon and I'm going to eat the bacon. I ate as much marrow as I could, made bone broth. I think that was one of the things that I would recommend, if you're at all concerned about gut health as you go through a carnivore diet experiment, for anybody that wants to, you can drink bone broth, and we know that helps with gut health. So that's something that, we can always build in there. Based on our conversation, I did try to move as far away from domesticated animals as possible. Mm-hmm. I was really fortunate with the timing of this that I had just harvested a deer. Local grass-fed wild. And I basically ate an entire deer the month of November. It's all gone. Wild salmon, really trying to mix up the animals that I ate, but also trying to get them from as many wild and pasture raised sources as possible. One of the things that really sort of eased one of my concerns in the beginning of this was a passage from John Rattay's book, Go Wild. I remembered reading this a year or two ago, and I came back to it because I was like, you know what, I think I remember seeing something about this where, we talk about maybe one of the concerns of a carnivore diet is a lack of micronutrients. Well, humans have never been good at assimilating these micronutrients from plants. And we found that the single best way for humans to overcome that inability to digest plants is to outsource that job of nutrient assimilation. And we do that by eating animals who eat a wide range of herbs and greens and plants and things like that. And that's one of the reasons that, wild, free-ranging, pasture-raised animals are so beneficial for us. But yeah, so, wild organ meats, marrow, and a wide variety of as far from domestic as possible animals.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at, even if a grass-fed cow goes out, like it's obviously better than a grain-fed, like commercially raised piece of meat, right? But still, they're only eating grass. Whereas if you go to, like you said, the deer you harvested, like they're going to be eating a huge variety of plants. And
right.
This is one of the things you can see this in, like for instance, a bison, like an actual free-range bison. And the color of the fat versus even a grass-fed cow, like it's completely different.
Oh, the color of the fat, the color of the meat. I mean, even if you just go to like a Whole Foods, just go to a Whole Foods or any store where they sell regular beef, like that feedlot beef, and then what they're labeling is grass-fed, you can see a huge difference in the color and the marbling. And then if you actually see wild animals, it's even more different. And the red is just, it's almost purple. And like you said, the fat's a different color. It's interesting. As soon as you started saying that, I thought of, I've been able to go to the Biohacker Summit in Sweden and Finland the last 2 years. And at the upgraded dinner there, they always have what they called an herb-fed butter. So they're like, hey, grass-fed butter is great, but the cows that we get this butter from eat wild herbs all the time. They don't even eat grass. So imagine like the nutrient profile of that food compared to, the other butter.
Yeah, I don't think people know this, but herbs are some of the most nutrient-dense plants possible. Like they radically increase the nutrient density if you put them in a meal. I mean, this is something that probably makes a lot of sense with how they taste. So people have been them for thousands of years because they tasted so great in meals, and so I mean, it's probably something that we knew we needed for a long period of time. Okay, so let's hit on quick. So my big 4 things where I think people need to hammer on for kind of maximum health would be nutrition, movement, stress, and sleep. So we went over the nutrition one, hit that kind of hard. Any tips that you have for people? If you were to tell them one thing what they could change with the nutrition?
I think don't be afraid to experiment. I think find out, focus on the science of why things work, not what people are telling you they do or what you should do. And I think if you can you don't have to have a degree in it, or you don't have to have, you don't have to be a biochemist, but if you can just understand how the body works, then you'll be much better prepared to figure out how to give your body what it needs. Good. Oh, and the movement, are you still doing the strength, even easier strength? Are you still doing that now? I am. I'm enjoying it, and I like seeing those numbers go up. So I will probably continue to do that. I'm doing that. I'm also, playing with some gymnastics stuff at the end of those workouts. And I get 10,000 steps a day minimum every day. So I think if you're going to ask me for something on movement, it's focus on strength, get stronger, and move well, move frequently, and move in as many varied ways as possible. Perfect. How are you getting the steps in? Is there some type of routine that you have built in that you just go and walk raw? So actually, I used to have a Fitbit, and if anybody's worn a Fitbit, it buzzes every hour, like 10 minutes before the end of the hour, and it says, you need this many more steps to get 250 steps in the hour. So I don't have one anymore, but what I do try to do is move as many times as possible throughout the day. I've got an iPhone. If you have an iPhone, you just go to the health section. It actually will show you a graph of how much you move every hour. And I just look at that thing, and that's how I track my steps. And I'll get up every hour. Like some days, if I'm working at home all day, I'll just set a timer on the microwave or on my computer to go off every hour at 10 till, and I'll just go walk 500 steps every hour. Sometimes I just say, all right, I'm going to go for a walk for an hour and whatever. But it's just, I don't know that I necessarily have a trick as much as it's a focus. And, just say, I'm going to get my steps in today. And if it's 8 o'clock at night and I haven't gotten them in, I got to go for a walk.
Love it. I actually just recently got an Apple Watch, and I thought this thing would be just ridiculously stupid and add technology to my life. But I never have my phone on me anymore. Ever.
Wow.
And it won't let me do things like check Instagram or stuff like that. And so also they have little activity rings. And these things have been more motivating for me as somebody who's like pretty damn motivated already to be like, oh, well, my ring's not full. I need to go walk around. So it's crazy that even like the Fitbit probably created some habits in you that, it just translated till now. It's awesome.
Yeah.
So stress, how do you keep stress down? How do you deal with that kind of on a day-to-day basis?
I think of your 4, this is probably the one that I struggle with the most.
It's the easiest one to neglect, in my opinion.
Yeah, I will work myself into the ground. There's another reason I think we kind of get along is, we're both motivated. We both realize that there's a lot of things we want to accomplish, and you only have so much time. So, I float. Nice. I do yoga. And admittedly, I should do both more frequently. I do meditate almost daily. Gratitude practice. My wife and I have an evening routine that I adapted from what I got to experience with Todd White and his group at Dry Farm Wines. It's something that they do every single morning to start their day. Mm-hmm. And they were gracious enough to let me do it with them one day when I came out and did a podcast with Todd. And I really loved it. So I brought it home, and my wife and I do it. And, our modified version of it is just the best thing that happened to us today. And then we say the worst thing and, how we could have handled that better. A lot of times what you realize is that the worst thing that happened is really not that bad. We mention a few of the things that we're grateful for, and then we do some affirmations. That's a simple little thing, but it's really grounding, and it really kind of gives you something real to talk about. I don't know. I think those are about it. I think I need to incorporate more buffer days. I used to do that a lot more when I owned my own gym. It was a lot easier for me to see then when I needed those days more, because I was actually interacting with people, where the way I work now, I may not interact with anybody for a couple of weeks if I'm not traveling. So it's a lot harder for me to realize like, hey, I'm getting to this point where I need a day off. So I called those buffer days. And sometimes it's just you take a half day, or you take an afternoon, just go watch a movie, or you go in the fall, like when I was preparing to go hunting, I would just go out and shoot my bow and arrow. That's very meditative for me. So yeah, I do not do a good job at buffer days. I do like once a quarter. I do like 5-day retreats where I try to shut off all technology. But other than that, it's tough to get like 10 minutes buffer time. It's so hard. And I think the way our world is going, it's becoming more and more important for us to be able to do that. I did it this weekend. I actually turned my phone on airplane mode for a full 24 hours. And it's not hard once you do it, but it's that act of doing it. And then, sort of when you come back, sometimes it's like, oh, well, I got to explain to this person why I haven't responded to them in 18 hours. It's very important that we do that more and more now.
Any top tips for stress reduction for people?
I think this is probably me preaching to myself as much as to anybody else, but I think removing that guilt of, thinking that you always need to be doing something, realize that it's a mentor of mine used to tell us, put your own mask on first. It's like when you get on an airplane and they say, these oxygen masks are going to come down. Right. If you don't have yours on, there's zero chance that you're going to help somebody else. So that idea of self-care is extremely important. We can't do for others. You can't give to others what you don't have. So, you got to find a way to remove feeling guilty about those self-care days so that you can show up and be there for other people.
Good advice. So this last one, sleep. What's your sleep schedule looking like?
I'm actually I've always been pretty good about this. Probably because I learned early on. I mean, even before like getting into the world of like health or biohacking or whatever, I just learned that if I didn't sleep, I didn't perform the way I wanted to.
You didn't walk on the stage when you were modeling as well?
Man, when I was in New York, I was amazed. Like I'd given up drinking even before that. And I was just amazed at how some guys could, go out and drink and party and stay out all night. And then they'd show up and I'm like, you still look better than I do. No, sleep is one of those things where I think there's so many things that we could list, avoid blue light, turn off your Wi-Fi at night. If you turn off your Wi-Fi at night, that's 8 hours a night. Put it on one of those Christmas light timers and have your Wi-Fi go off at 10 and come back on at 6 a.m. That's 6 hours, or that's 8 hours every day. That's a third of your exposure to Wi-Fi over the course of a year, over the course of your lifetime, and it's really not going to affect your internet usage. The other alternative to that would be to, get rid of the wireless network and just have Ethernet, hardwire your place. But, Wi-Fi does affect the way we sleep and our sleep quality. So I think the biggest thing is to develop a routine. These routines, this sleep hygiene, whatever it is for you, it works through conditioning. If you read a book every single night before you go to sleep, and then you get on an airplane and you start reading a book, I bet you fall asleep.
I'm the same way. Like,
right?
I can get through now about 4 pages of a book at night before I just hit my head hard.
Yeah, it's a conditioning thing. So I think whatever your routine is, just be consistent with it. And, it doesn't have to be the same as mine or anybody else's that you hear, but pick a few things that, wind down and put you in a good place. And, whether it could be a breathing exercise, it could be gratitude practice, whatever, but definitely avoid screens, right before bed, and be consistent with whatever routine you choose.
Yeah, it's great. So you mentioned earlier about podcasts, the Better Human Project, correct?
Yeah.
So you want to tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so I'm really excited. This is a somewhat new venture. The Better Human Project is, like any other podcast, it's designed to bring the listeners the best possible information from, the best possible guests. But in addition to that, it is a chance to give back and support not only the research of the people who come on the show, but also to donate for veteran organizations, underprivileged families. Maybe they need coats at wintertime, or they're food insecure families. And we're doing that through Patreon. So patreon.com/Ryan Munsey. 50% of the proceeds fund the actual show. The other 50% go to, like I said, underprivileged families, veteran organizations, or the research of our guests who are doing really cool things.
Love it. And so patreon.com/Ryan Munsey, Munsey, correct?
Correct.
Awesome. We'll have all these links in the show, obviously. And then where else can people find you?
So Better Human Project is a podcast. Instagram is @RyanMunsey_. Website is ryanmunsey.com. And there will be a book coming out soon. So if you guys want to check out the book, go to ryanmunsey.com/freebook. The first 1,000 people to go there are going to get a free copy of the book.
What? I need to go now. Get my copy before they run out.
Oh, yeah.
Awesome.
You'll get a copy. Don't worry about that.
Love it. Yeah. Well, I'm sure we'll have you on round 2 to address the results you got from the Carnivore Diet, update kind of where you were at from that, and then chat about the book.
All right. I'd love it.
Until then, man, thanks for being on the show, and we'll chat soon. All right, everyone. Thanks for listening to another episode of the Keto Answers podcast. I hope you enjoyed it, but even if you didn't, I would love a review. Just go over to iTunes, wherever you listen to your podcasts, and pop in a review so we can get found by more people, get better guests, and have the information that you need. So please go to iTunes, wherever you listen to your podcasts, and leave us a review. And if you're new to keto, head on over to perfectketo.com/podcast and enter your email for all our top tips and guides on getting started with the ketogenic diet. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.